Hi, and welcome to Experience Points by University XP. On Experience Points, we explore different ways we can learn from games. I'm your host, Dave Eng from Games-Based Learning by University XP. Find out more by going to universityxp.com. On today's episode, we'll learn from Shaun McMillan. Shaun is a creative with experience as an animator, graphic designer, and game artist, plus a background teaching game design to high schoolers. He designed Great Boy the Game and Alliance, a political science megagame where 72 players race to solve global crises. Explore more of his work at bestclassever.org. Shaun, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great, Shaun. So I know that I asked you originally on the show because of your past presentation from the Games-Based Learning Virtual Alliance, Learning Virtual Conference, I should say. And specifically, I want to focus this episode on games-based lecturing because, a lot of people may not be familiar with your work. So overall, I want to focus this question on you introduce how to turn a lecture into a game from your past presentation. Can you share more about this concept and how it shifts how an audience engages with the content overall?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I have a presentation that I did for your game conference, and then I actually recorded it and posted it on my website. So it's available if you want to see the full recording or just see it written out as an article. It's on
Mhm.
bestclassever.org/lecture. And there, when you first bring it up, it has like, a big flow chart, and then at the end of the article, it talks about how to add like mechanics like dice rolling and probability and odds and
Mhm.
things like this. Kind of make it look and feel like a game, like a
Mhm.
complicated game. But in reality, to take any lecture and turn it into a game, it really just comes down to one thing. You just need to design one really great multiple choice question
Mhm.
as a scenario. So
Mhm.
like a political science scenario or like a difficult choice that the protagonist has to make. And so, most stories, most literature, most historical events, they come down to one critical decision,
Mhm.
usually in what we call the midpoint crisis, which is like the peak of Act Two. Okay, so
Mhm.
the middle of Act Two, the protagonist is faced with a choice that's going to have dire consequences for himself, for his community. It could be life and death, or it could be even low stakes, but to him, it feels high stakes,
Mhm.
right? And so if you can put the audience in that protagonist's shoes and then just give them three really viable options, like three seemingly right answers.
Mhm.
If you can design that one multiple choice question and lead with that question,
Mhm.
that can take your lecture and make it really, really engaging. Every bit as engaging as, a good game. And so and then if you design backwards from that question, well, then now you know exactly what context, historical context details you need to provide.
Mhm.
You only want to you actually want the protagonist or the audience to be in that kind of scenario where they have limited intel, right? You're making a critical choice with time pressure, but you don't know everything.
Mhm.
All right. And so you really want to you do need to provide some context and lead up to this question, lead up to the scenario, but you only want to give the details that make each of the options seem really viable.
Mhm.
Right. And so this helps you to know exactly how you should design your entire lecture
Mhm.
because it helps you to know, okay, I need these historical context, these details. The weather matters. The weather is going to weigh in on the decision. So like, for example, the two stories that I use uh, in the scenarios in the video, I used a story from the Bible in
Mhm.
Joshua chapter 9.
Mhm.
So it's kind of Josh's political science simulation or scenario.
Mhm.
But then in the written article, I use Shakespeare's King Henry V,
Mhm.
who had to make a critical decision as to whether to go into battle or not. And they're both kind of like go into battle or not decisions. And so, yeah, basically, you need to provide whatever details and historical context to help you understand that protagonist's biases, choices, intel. Like in both of these situations, rain, whether was it going to rain or not that day, had huge consequences for the outcome of the battle.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then at the end, that's basically all you need. But on top of that, if you want to, you could come in with like complicated flow charts of like, okay, if they choose A, then it's going to have this result B. If they choose the second option, it's going to have this other story outcome. And then,
Mhm.
so you could prepare two different alternative story outcomes, or you can just say like, hey, this is what the character chose. Let's see what the consequences were. And then you could, for mechanics or to make it interesting or more engaging, you could just literally have the audience vote. So
Mhm.
everyone gets like a live poll,
Right.
right? And then the audience actually gets to see as the members of the audience use their cell phones to commit to a choice,
Mhm.
they can see like the live poll populating, and you can kind of have this interesting kind of social proof that like, oh, I was going to go A, but everyone else seems to be going B.
Mhm.
And then you can discuss about these. There's just so many different possibilities you can go after that. You could throw in dice to say like there's a 50% chance of there being rain, right? And
Mhm.
then that's going to weigh in some certain way. And
Nice.
so it becomes really fun after that. But it's so great that you can make it every bit as engaging as a game by simply designing one really well done multiple choice question.
I see. All right. Thanks, Sean. I appreciate that. I know that uh usually people are, like, I guess if you're creating any lecture content, a lot of people are really focusing on like, well, it's a lecture, it's very didactic. I just have to share information, share content. But your approach is very much based on, listen, there's gonna be a choice. There's gonna be a, you could say like a decision framework, a structure. Like a lot of people I think are really familiar with a multiple choice question. It has like one stem, three distractors, and like maybe one correct choice. But I think the way that you framed it here is that you present everyone with a choice at the very beginning, and then you are now presenting all of the content and context around making that choice. And I think your discussion about like the social proof about how people make choices, like within this framework, is really interesting. But my question for you, and I don't know if you had addressed this before because it's been a while since I rewatched it, but like for people that are skeptics about like lectures, people I know, some of my colleagues are just very much about lecture being completely didactic. Like it's, I'm sharing you information for 45 minutes. It's not necessarily something that's going to be engaging. That's something I'm going to do later. How do you address people's like skepticism about lectures being, like it should not be engaging. It should be didactic. Have you ever talked to like a colleague or professional like that?
I haven't had that pushback. I actually come from a very strong Christian background. I'm a minister at my church, and I've done a lot of preaching over the years. And,
Mm-hmm.
didactic basically means this is preachy, or it has like a key objective that you're hoping to, moral, philosophical point you're trying to make with the lesson. And
Right.
it's funny because actually, when I do this the best, this
Mm-hmm.
like kind of lecturing,
Mm-hmm.
it is didactic. Actually, it has a didactic point.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, instead of creating alternative fictional alternative histories, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
is what you would have to do to give consequences for a choice that the audience makes, but the protagonist did not make. What I do is actually compare it to, so for example, if I use the Bible story,
Mm-hmm.
I'll just compare it to another Bible story in which the protagonist did have a similar choice and did make that alternative choice. So, for example, in the story of Joshua, chapter 9,
Mm-hmm.
Joshua is pressured to make a high stakes commitment to war, and he has to do it. He could do it quickly, so he chooses to act very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
King Josiah in Second Chronicles has a similar scenario, and Joshua comes out being the hero. And then Joshua is an ancestor of Josiah. So Josiah would have known about Joshua.
Mm-hmm.
And so he has a certain bias towards these very strong ancestral protagonists, like very strong war hero
Mm-hmm.
ancestors and a reputation he's trying to live up to. And so he also commits to making like what appears to be as a very rash and foolish decision to
Mm-hmm.
commit head in
Mm-hmm.
on going into battle. And it turns it tragic for him. And
Mm-hmm.
so I plant seeds from the very beginning of each lecture that like, hey, because it's a Christian, right? So it's like
Right, right.
it's about prayer. It's like, hey, he prayed and then he made the right decision. But
Mm-hmm.
Josiah didn't pray and he made the same decision. He actually made the same, he chose like A, is it just like Joshua chose A, but it ended up being the wrong decision because he didn't pray. He didn't. So like I cause the audience to question their own choices. And then I have seeds that I planted from the beginning, like saying, hey, A, B, or C is not actually the answer. The real answer is the advice I gave you at the very, very beginning,
Mm-hmm.
which is you need to pray. That any given scenario might have different, better option, but you're not going to know unless you're being very intuitive and you're really dialed in with God or whatever you believe in,
Mm-hmm.
your
I see.
ideals.
All
So
right.
there is definitely a way to make it more didactic if you want to,
Mm-hmm.
and it has that much more power when you cause the audience to commit to a choice and then to question it afterwards. And some of the
Mm-hmm.
best movies and stuff I've seen are capable of doing this. Sometimes they'll do it through they'll show you a critical scene at the very beginning,
Mm-hmm.
and then they'll give you the context. And then when you revisit that scene with the context, you realize, oh, I totally judged with a bias or made some false assumptions, and it causes you to question your assumptions, which is very powerful.
All right. No, that's a really good insight, Sean. And I think that, like I'm trying to think of an example right now, but like there's many, I guess like books or movies or just stories or television shows that begin like in medias res. So like right in the middle of the action. So,
Uh-huh.
us as the audience, we see that, oh, this protagonist has to make a choice, or me in the role as the protagonist, I have to make a choice. But then the rest of the story, the medium unlocks the rest of the content and context. And you realize that like what looks like on the surface like a very simple choice is actually has a lot of layers and a lot of like deeply contextualized decision points that this character now needs to navigate through. And I think those are really good learning experiences because learners can realize that there are very few choices that are very black and white, very straightforward. When really you need to critically examine like the context and the content around everything. So I think this is a really great framework for addressing that. Thank you, Sean. Second question I have for you is again, I want this to be as applicable as possible to educators or anyone that may want to use or adapt some of your framework for their own practice. So, my second question is on the advice to educators. What advice would you give to educators who are curious about gamification, but feel overwhelmed by the idea of quote unquote designing a game? I know you already talked about, basing your lecture around that one really good multiple choice question, but you, in your background and what you've developed and applied so far, what is some advice you would give to other educators that want to, start applying games to their work or to gamify something?
Yeah, so it's games are great. If you can add a game element, we all know that games are great. We know students love games. We know that we ourselves like games, and we like having a sense of agency, right?
Mhm,
Like a sense of having a choice in the out and some that like I like this idea that like for the really important things, there
mhm,
is no answer in the back of the book, right?
right.
Like I like business because there's no clear path or strategy. And a lot of times games create this kind of dynamism in the classroom and they can
Mhm,
be more engaging. And so it's like, okay, great, let's add games to our curriculum. But it's like another layer on top of an already very demanding, there's already so many demands on every educator's plate, from the admin from above and to getting grades in
mhm,
and having to satisfy all of the checks on all these boxes. And it's like, how
mhm,
am I going to find, where are they going to find time for this? So a lot of as a high school teacher, I found myself thinking creatively about this in the summertime when I had a lot of free time and getting all
mhm,
excited and then abandoning everything. But the moment I hit reality
mhm.
in the beginning of the school year, because there's just so many demands. Like, how am I going to prepare a game ahead of time on top of, on top of, on top of?
Right.
And so to design a game is really hard, right? And
Yeah.
then to test it and to make sure it works and to so that could be a nightmare. But
Mhm,
luckily, some people have already designed the game, so we can just
mhm,
adopt some games. Well,
mhm,
they're not necessarily intended for that key learning objective.
mhm,
Does the mechanics even fit the key learning objective, right? Or am I just adding points to the curriculum that they can earn by going an extra mile or something? That's kind of gamification as opposed to like actual games and
mhm,
game-based learning.
mhm,
But all of this is kind of like problematic, right? And so, yeah, for me, I was like, okay, maybe so of course we can adopt some game we all know some games and some of
mhm,
those games do suit certain key learning objectives. So,
mhm,
if you happen to be teaching about how viruses spread, well then you can clearly have people play that popular pandemic game by I
mhm,
think
mhm,
it's Matt Leacock. So great, perfect match.
mhm,
But, that's not gonna become like a key go-to tool for all your lessons. So
mhm,
that's why I focus more on this kind of game-based lecturing or just taking some game components and adding them to your game. And I also like systems like maybe not Dungeons and Dragons, but like tabletop RG elements that you
mhm,
can bring into the to your lectures, right?
mhm,
So just bringing a little bit of dice into the game or bringing a critical choice into the game or
mhm,
giving everyone some tokens and these tokens are going to represent certain things.
mhm,
And so what I ended up making I was teaching game design
mhm,
with high school. And I was like, okay, well, let's make a game. Like let's make some games. So we actually intentionally made games for the classroom that have a lot of kind of loose and easy rules that are very modular. You can take this rule or abandon that one or add this. Like you don't need all the rules. You can just pick and choose the ones you want.
mhm,
And it lends itself to a lot of different themes. And so we actually made a political science simulation game that can
mhm,
easily be adapted to as few as 3 players or as many as 72.
mhm, mhm,
So we were trying to go for kind of, I got the idea actually from the TED Talk by John Hunter, and he
mhm,
introduced the world peace game.
Hmm.
And in doing a heavy, extensive research about how his game worked, I found out, oh, actually, he was inspired by Buckminster Fuller,
Hmm.
who made the world game.
Hmm.
And so we were trying to make a version that was suitable for high school students and maybe even college students. And that's when I went down the kind of designer board game rabbit
Hmm.
hole. I started playing with a lot of different board games.
Hmm.
And then one of my students came in and showed me about mega games. And so mega games are like huge political science simulations inspired by some old war gamers in Europe.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
around that time, one YouTube video made it really popular. And so Americans started getting involved in making mega games. And so our class made one of the first mega games in America, but we
Hmm.
made it specifically for the classroom to be adapted to any kind of situation and scenario and to any kind of theme. And so, yeah, ever since then, I've been kind of promoting it on my website
Hmm.
and seeing if working with different lecture or educators to see how they use it and how it could be even more easily adapted to the classroom,
Hmm.
things like that.
Nice. Thanks, Sean. I know that you skewed in a little bit to the next question, which is I was going to ask you about Alliance because I know that that is the mega game that you designed. But I just wanted to summarize for all of our listeners that I think one of the great takeaways that you've kind of embodied here and you discussed before was the modularity of everything. Like said, you could just take a game that's already been designed, like, about the spread about like a contagion, like pandemic, because that game already exists and it kind of already meets that learning outcome. So you don't need to recreate the wheel if you're an educator. You can just take a game that already exists, something that commercially already exists, and just adapt it for your purposes. But another really good point that you brought up, Sean, was the fact that you can just make things modular. You can just gamify or adapt one game or use one game or just parts of a game or just even individual rules for certain games and adapt it for your individual learners, classroom, learning outcomes, modality, content, etc. And I kind of run into this with a lot of other educators I talk to, which is the fact that you don't need to gamify everything. You can just take one very small part, apply it to whatever work you're doing or whatever you're teaching or whatever educational project you're working on, and just apply that one aspect. You don't need to create the wheel from scratch. You can just apply some games that are available right now.
Hmm.
So Sean, you brought this up. I want to go into it here because you already defined what mega games were, I think, but you specifically described that classroom game Alliance, the ultimate world leader political science mega game, which I believe is the one that you played with 72 students. So, can you please just briefly explain what a mega game is for our audience? Because I know you talked about it a little bit, but if you could offer up your own personal definition, I would appreciate it. And then two, can you talk more about Alliance and like you provided the background on it, but can you tell us more about what the game was and how it plays and what its impact was for your students?
Yeah, so we got really excited when we discovered this concept of mega games. We'd already been playing some designer board games, and it was a YouTube board game reviewer that went and played a mega game and then
Hmm.
exposed us to what mega games were. So mega games are typically political science simulations. No, not always. Some of them have a fantastical element to them. Ours doesn't. It's kind of a more of a near future realistic political science simulation.
Hmm.
And they come out of a history of wargaming.
Hmm.
So wargaming, I don't know if you guys know or not, but like the state for years now has been doing, or for decades and centuries has been doing wargaming, where they do simulations to try to figure out, okay, if we go to war, like say, for instance, before the Vietnam War, uh, Johnny Harris recently he's a very popular YouTuber, recently did a video about the history of war games and about how the state does these war games to figure out like what are the possibilities that we should expect if we're going to go to war in Vietnam or if we're
Hmm.
going to go into World War II. And it's really fascinating because it turns out the like four-star generals that participated in these games,
Hmm.
they said that they actually were not surprised. They were very rarely surprised in World War II because they had gamed out so many scenarios.
Hmm.
And in
Hmm.
Vietnam, when they gamed out Vietnam before going in, they dismissed all the learnings from the game
Hmm.
because they thought it was ridiculous that like such a low technology uh, country could hold up against America with such with heavy tech,
Hmm.
right? Because it foresaw actually in the game scenarios that like the American audience or the American political constituents would not stand like they would turn against the government and start protesting the government, and that this low technology enemy would be able to hold up against high technology. And so they ignored the results, went into war, and then, but they weren't surprised because they had gamed this out. And
Hmm.
so out of that history, I thought, well, let's let's make our own, this is the way to teach students, right? Like, let's let the students be the leaders, see themselves as world leaders, and give them
Hmm.
this the set up the geopolitical situations, and then see how they handle it, and even give them open-ended creative possibilities and see what they come up with.
Hmm.
But yeah, a mega game is basically just a big game. And in speaking specifically technically, like how it compares to other games,
Hmm.
typically mega games are using war game rules, and which basically makes it fall somewhere between LARP, tabletop RPG, and board
Hmm.
games. They're not as tightly designed as board games, so there's a much more open-ended element to it, the way that tabletop RPG has a very creative storytelling element to it. And it has looser rules like tabletop RPGs. So we use
Hmm.
dice to simulate all the uncertainty and probabilities, which are predetermined. So those are some of the assumptions that go into the game design. And there can be big elements of LARP to it because, like, I mean, when my students played it, one of the first things they asked is like, can we cosplay? Like, can we dress up as our team? And it
Hmm.
ends up being one of the most OP things in the game
Yeah.
because when you're in a room with 70 people and you're trying to figure out the players, when you're trying to find the player from Russia or the
Hmm.
three players from Russia, well, if they're all wearing Siberian husky hats, it's like they're
Uh-huh.
very easy to identify
Right.
and it creates an impression. So cosplay ends up being like or just the role playing element. There's a huge role play element to mega games almost always.
Nice. Thank you, Sean. I appreciate that.
Oh, but I
And
should
that,
mention about the scale. So like
yeah,
as soon as you have like say 30 or more players or even like 12 or 24 players,
yeah,
only then do we start considering it not just a role-playing game, but it's actually like a mega game.
right.
And you can have as many as 100. And there's been mega games in Europe with like 200 and 300 people.
I see. And you said that your game Alliance that had 72 players the last time you played it?
I've been running it for 10 years now.
Hmm.
And I did do it at Gen Con with 100 players.
Oh, I see.
But we had some problems with the game, but
Hmm.
which we thought it was because we had too big of a player count and that
Hmm.
the game kind of like failed at that scale.
Yeah.
But actually looking back on it now and having seen more mega games run at Gen Con, we're starting to
Hmm.
realize that like these are just the problems you have at convention games. Like it
Mm.
wasn't necessarily because of Alliance or the way it was designed.
Oh, I
And
see.
so, but it could be where it's hard to say. But I do think you can run Alliance successfully with 100 players now that I've kind of streamlined it and made
Hmm.
the rules easier to learn and stuff.
And can you give us a broad overview on Alliance for those that are not familiar with it?
Yeah, so and this will give you a good idea of how a mega game is designed too. So what you do is you set a time. So we're going to run this game for 4 hours
Hmm.
or over 4 1 hour class periods.
Hmm.
Okay. And then you're going to have like a big war room map. So you're going to have a big map of all the nations involved.
Hmm.
And for Alliance, they're real nations, but we only have like the key big nations. So,
Hmm.
and there's varying sizes. So we'll have uh, a pseudonym for China. We call China fast growing nation. We call
Hmm.
America rich nation.
Hmm.
We call Latin America colorful nation. And then
Hmm.
we'll have Russia, which is strong nation,
Hmm.
and Japan, which is tech nation,
Hmm.
and South Korea, which is cloud nation, North Korea, which is shadow nation. So we use
Hmm.
pseudonyms, and it's
Hmm.
kind of near future so that we can have a kind of a slightly sci-fi uh, burgeoning technologies introduced into the games
Hmm.
and to create all these kind of moral dilemmas and collective action problems and problem of the commons, like basically geopolitical issues. And so we throw all these geopolitical issues at them. Oh, I should explain how it's structured. So you have 3 or 4 players
Hmm.
are committed to a team. Each of them has a role on that team. So one of them will be the president or prime minister.
Hmm.
One of them will be the secretary of defense, so military, and then one of them will be the lead scientist.
Hmm.
And yeah, so they each have their role within that nation, and then they have their national agenda.
Hmm.
And so their job is to try to achieve these key objectives for their nation.
Hmm.
But their objectives directly conflict with some other nations'
Hmm.
objectives, right? So Canada, which is called Peaceful Nation, is trying to maintain world peace,
Hmm.
but Strong Nation is strongly incentivized to start a war so that
Hmm.
we'll have some tension and conflict in the game.
Hmm.
And so you have these 20 different nation teams, and then we'll have a team of control players, which are like the referees. They're the only
Right.
ones who actually really know the game in detail, and they are
Hmm.
kind of DMing or dungeon mastering the game mastering the game for the rest of the players
I see.
and walking them through how to play and what they need to do next and what decision they need to make right now.
Hmm.
We use poker chips to represent national assets. So we have 5 different color poker chips, and each color represents a different kind of resource from their nation.
Hmm.
Each nation has a surplus in one and a deficiency in another. So there's a
Hmm.
strong incentive for them to trade,
Hmm.
and then they can use those tokens to try to do whatever it is they come up with that they want to do to try to solve all these geopolitical problems. And
Mm.
basically, we give them 4 hours to solve all the world's problems.
Exactly 4 hours to solve all of the world's problems. Have you gotten some
All you
good
need, really.
feedback from your students in when you played it with them? I know you've run it many times, but like, what would
Uh-huh.
you say is the most impactful outcome you've gotten from your students in terms of their learning?
Well, so sometimes the players we work with younger players and older players, and even older players will play quite diabolically, right? Because it's all
Hmm.
role
Hmm.
play. It's the stakes aren't real, right?
Right.
So you can experiment and try stuff, and you can be really dastardly just to try to make because the goal really is to make there's no winners or losers in the game. There's
Hmm.
just control of the narrative.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so, you might do something really diabolical to have a huge say in the narrative at the end, right? So you go
Hmm.
against everybody else and you use some kind of really powerful trump card to really surprise everyone. And
Hmm.
we've had players do that. And we basically just say, like, look, if you guys are still at war by the end of the thing and you haven't settled everything, then it's a Shakespearean. We just label it a Shakespearean tragedy,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
everyone basically loses the game.
Oh, I see.
Because the goal is it's supposed to be a world peace game, right? That's the ultimate theme.
Right, right.
So it's all win or all lose. It's not really like, oh, this person had this many points and this person had that many points. We can't track points. We tried to
Hmm.
implement that system because logically it seems like the right thing to do,
Right.
but it becomes such a crazy, chaotic, collaborative. There's so many people involved. We just can't keep track of everything at the end.
I see. Wow, great. Thanks, Sean. I appreciate that. I know that mega games are kind of like a large project, and it may not be something that all educators can attempt, at least on their first try. But I think that alliance with you and your students has been a really good, at least template in order to follow going in the future. So I appreciate it, Sean.
Yeah, and it
We,
could sound really intimidating, but I do want to add that like
yeah.
some of the more recent innovations that I've added to the game is I have actually made a three-player one round of turns to like 20 to 30-minute tutorial
Hmm.
version of the game. So I've made the mega game. We're trying to make these things more accessible, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I want to make it to where even teachers who don't know design or board games could actually try this.
Right.
And so, yeah, I've at my website you can try it. It's like you can just download this like 3-page printout, and then you print that out, and then you and two other players can sit down and actually see like how amazing this is, and have like a very short, very fast experience of like a mega game for 3 players. So it's not really mega, but
Hmm.
it gives you a taste of how a mega game works and what the basic mechanics are.
Nice. Thank you, Sean. That brings us to our outro. So now you mentioned your website. So where's the best place that people can go to find out more about you and hopefully download some of your great resources?
Yeah, so my main website is bestclassever.org. And that's got all the things that I do there. But if you're more specifically interested in Alliance, the mega game, it's on that
Hmm.
website. But if you want to go directly to that, you can just go to mymegagame.com.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, Sean. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I hope you found this episode useful. If you'd like to learn more, then a great place to start is with my free course on gamification. You can sign up for it at universityxp.com/gamification. You can also get a full transcript of this episode, including links to references in the description or show notes. Thanks for joining us. Again, I'm your host, Dave Eng from Games-Based Learning by University XP. On Experience Points, we explore different ways we can learn from games. If you like this episode, please consider commenting, sharing, and subscribing. Subscribing is absolutely free and ensures that you'll get the next episode of Experience Points delivered directly to you. I'd also love it if you took some time to rate the show. We live to lift others with learning, so if you found this episode useful, consider sharing it with someone who could also benefit. Also, make sure to visit University XP online at universityxp.com. University XP is also on Twitter and Blue Sky as University XP, and on Facebook and LinkedIn as University XP. Also, feel free to email me anytime. My email address is dave@universityxp.com. Game on.